Welcome, dear listener, to the extraordinary story of George Washington, a man whose character and leadership shaped not only the birth of the United States of America, but also established enduring principles of democratic governance and peaceful transfer of power that would inspire nations around the world for centuries to come. Tonight, we journey through the remarkable life of America's first president, a Virginia planter who became a revolutionary general, a reluctant politician who became the father of his country, and a man whose greatest achievement may have been his willingness to relinquish power when he could have held it forever. As you settle into your comfortable position, allow your breathing to slow and deepen, like the gentle rhythm of the Potomac River flowing past Mount Vernon on a peaceful summer evening, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a new nation being born. Feel the tensions of the modern world fade away, replaced by the timeless values of honor, duty, and service that guided Washington throughout his long and eventful life, values that remain as relevant today as they were in the turbulent years of America's founding. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing on the portico of Mount Vernon, looking out over the broad expanse of the Potomac River as it winds its way toward Chesapeake Bay, while behind you stands the man who would become known as the father of his country, a tall, dignified figure whose presence commanded respect and whose character embodied the highest ideals of the Enlightenment. Picture Washington in his later years, his hair powdered white, his face lined by decades of responsibility and decision-making, his eyes still sharp with intelligence and determination despite the weight of the burdens he had carried for his country. We will follow Washington's journey from his birth into the Virginia gentry to his death as the most revered figure in American history, a life that spanned the transformation of 13 separate colonies into a unified nation, and that helped define what it means to be an American. We will witness his evolution from a young surveyor seeking his fortune on the frontier to the commander-in-chief who led a ragtag continental army to victory over the world's most powerful empire, and from a reluctant president who established crucial precedents for democratic governance, to an elder statesman whose farewell address would guide American foreign policy for generations. Let your mind drift like the morning mist rising from the Virginia countryside, where tobacco fields stretch toward distant blue mountains and where the rhythms of plantation life provided the backdrop for Washington's early years. We will explore the world of colonial Virginia that shaped his character, the military campaigns that tested his leadership, and the political challenges that required him to balance competing interests while remaining true to his principles of republican government and individual liberty. Tonight, we will discover the paradoxes of this remarkable man, the slaveholder who helped create a nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal, the military commander who won a war by avoiding decisive battles, the reluctant politician who established the presidency as an institution of service rather than personal aggrandizement, and the wealthy planter who chose to step down from power when he could have become king. We will examine how his personal qualities of integrity, perseverance, and self-discipline enabled him to navigate the treacherous waters of revolution and nation-building while maintaining the trust and respect of his contemporaries. This is the story of a man who believed that the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally, staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. As we journey through Washington's remarkable life, let the story wash over you like the gentle breeze that stirs the leaves of the great oak trees at Mount Vernon, carrying you peacefully toward the shores of sleep, while enriching your understanding of what it means to live a life of principled leadership and selfless service to one's country and fellow citizens. Chapter 1. Child of Virginia, 1732 to 1748. Our story begins on February 22nd, 1732, at Pope's Creek Plantation in Westmoreland County, Virginia, where George Washington was born into the world of the colonial Virginia gentry, a society that combined English traditions with American innovations, and that would profoundly shape his character, values, and understanding of leadership. The Virginia of Washington's birth was a land of vast plantations and small farms, of great houses and slave quarters, of ambitious planters and indentured servants, all bound together by the cultivation of tobacco and the complex social relationships that this labor-intensive crop required. Picture, if you will, the Virginia tidewater of the early 18th century, a landscape of broad rivers and deep forests, where great plantations lined the banks of the Potomac, Rappahannock, and James rivers like pearls on a string, each one a self-contained world with its own fields, workshops, and communities. The plantation houses, built in the Georgian style with their symmetrical facades and elegant proportions, represented not only wealth and status, but also the aspirations of a colonial elite that sought to recreate the best of English civilization while adapting to the realities of life in the New World. Washington's father, Augustine Washington, was a moderately successful planter and land speculator who owned several thousand acres and dozens of slaves, making him a member of Virginia's emerging gentry class, but not one of its wealthiest or most prominent families. Augustine was a practical man who understood that success in colonial Virginia required not only agricultural skill, but also political connections, business acumen, and the ability to navigate the complex social hierarchies that governed plantation society. Washington's mother, Mary Ball Washington, came from a family of more modest means, but possessed the strong will and fierce independence that would characterize her relationship with her eldest son throughout her long life. Mary was a demanding mother who expected much from her children and who instilled in George the habits of discipline, responsibility, and attention to detail that would serve him well throughout his career. Her influence on Washington's character was profound, though their relationship was often strained by her possessiveness and his desire for independence. The circumstances of Washington's birth as the eldest son of Augustine's second marriage placed him in a somewhat ambiguous position within the family hierarchy, as his older half-brothers Lawrence and Augustine Jr. had prior claims to the family's most valuable properties and social connections. This situation may have contributed to Washington's lifelong drive to prove himself and to achieve success through his own efforts, rather than relying solely on inherited advantages. Picture young George in the nursery at Pope's Creek, a robust child with reddish-brown hair and grey-blue eyes, already showing signs of the physical strength and commanding presence that would distinguish him throughout his life. Even as a small boy, Washington was noted for his size and athleticism, qualities that would serve him well in the physically demanding world of colonial Virginia, where a gentleman was expected to be skilled in riding, hunting, and other outdoor pursuits. Washington's early education was typical of the Virginia gentry, emphasizing practical skills rather than classical learning, as his family lacked the resources to send him to England for the kind of formal education that his half-brothers had received. He learned to read and write, acquired basic mathematical skills, and studied the principles of surveying and land measurement that would prove crucial to his later career. His education also included instruction in the social graces expected of a Virginia gentleman, including dancing, proper deportment, and the complex rules of etiquette that governed interactions among the colonial elite. The death of Augustine Washington in 1743, when George was only 11 years old, marked a turning point in his life and forced him to confront the realities of his family's financial situation and his own uncertain prospects. Augustine's will left the bulk of his estate to his older sons, while George inherited Ferry Farm, a modest property on the Rappahannock River, along with 10 slaves and a few other assets. This inheritance, while providing him with a foundation for future success, was hardly sufficient to guarantee him a place among Virginia's leading families. Picture Washington as a young teenager at Ferry Farm, learning to manage a small plantation while continuing his education and beginning to understand the complexities of Virginia society. The farm was located near Fredericksburg, a growing commercial town that exposed Washington to the world of trade and commerce that was increasingly important to Virginia's economy. His experiences at Ferry Farm taught him valuable lessons about agriculture, labor management, and the challenges of making a living from the land. Washington's relationship with his half-brother Lawrence, who had inherited Mount Vernon and married into the prominent Fairfax family, provided him with access to Virginia's highest social circles and exposed him to opportunities that would have been otherwise unavailable to him. Lawrence had served as an officer in the British military and had connections throughout the colonial establishment, making him an important mentor and role model for his younger brother. The influence of the Fairfax family on Washington's early development cannot be overstated, as they were one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in colonial Virginia, with vast landholdings in the Northern Neck and the Shenandoah Valley. Through Lawrence's marriage to Anne Fairfax, Washington gained access to a world of privilege and opportunity that would shape his understanding of leadership, social responsibility, and the possibilities available to ambitious young men in colonial America. Picture Washington as a frequent visitor to Belvoir, the Fairfax family seat, where he observed the manners and customs of Virginia's aristocracy while forming friendships that would last throughout his life. The Fairfax household was a center of learning and culture, where the latest books and ideas from Europe were discussed, and where young Washington was exposed to Enlightenment thinking about government, society, and human nature. Washington's early romantic interests, including his infatuation with Sally Fairfax, the wife of his friend George William Fairfax, revealed both his passionate nature and his strict adherence to the moral codes that governed Virginia society. His ability to maintain proper relationships despite his personal feelings demonstrated the self-discipline and respect for social conventions that would characterize his behavior throughout his life. The decision to pursue a career as a surveyor was made when Washington was in his mid-teens, reflecting both his mathematical aptitude and the practical opportunities available to young men of his social position. Surveying was a respected profession in colonial Virginia, where the constant expansion of settlement created a steady demand for skilled land measurers, and it offered the possibility of earning substantial fees while gaining intimate knowledge of the frontier regions where fortunes could be made through land speculation. Washington's training as a surveyor under the guidance of experienced practitioners provided him with technical skills that would prove valuable throughout his life, but it also exposed him to the challenges and opportunities of frontier life. His work required him to travel extensively through the Virginia backcountry, where he encountered Native American tribes, frontier settlers, and the natural obstacles that made land development such a risky and potentially rewarding enterprise. Picture Washington as a young surveyor, carrying his instruments through the forests and mountains of the Virginia frontier, learning to read the landscape and to understand the complex relationships between geography, climate, and human settlement that would inform his later military and political strategies. His experiences on the frontier taught him valuable lessons about leadership, self-reliance, and the importance of careful planning and preparation in any undertaking. Washington's completion of his surveying apprenticeship and his appointment as surveyor of Culpeper County at the age of 17 marked his entry into professional life and provided him with the financial independence that would allow him to begin accumulating the land and wealth that were essential to social advancement in colonial Virginia. His success as a surveyor demonstrated his competence and reliability, qualities that would recommend him for greater responsibilities and opportunities in the years to come. The young Washington who emerged from his apprenticeship was already showing signs of the character traits that would define his later career: physical courage, intellectual curiosity, social ambition, and a deep respect for the institutions and traditions that governed Virginia society. He was 21 years old, a tall, athletic young man with a commanding presence and a reputation for integrity and competence, ready to take his place among Virginia's emerging leaders and to begin the journey that would eventually lead him to the presidency of the United States. As you continue to relax and drift towards sleep, imagine the young Washington standing on a hilltop in the Virginia Piedmont, his surveying instruments in hand as he looked out over the rolling countryside that would soon be divided into farms and plantations, his mind already turning toward the opportunities and challenges that awaited him in the years ahead. He was a young man of modest means, but unlimited ambition, shaped by the values and traditions of colonial Virginia, but destined to help create a new nation based on principles of liberty and self-government that would transform the world. Chapter 2: Frontier Soldier, 1748 to 1763. Washington's transition from surveyor to soldier began in 1748 when he joined a surveying expedition to the Shenandoah Valley organized by Lord Fairfax, an experience that exposed him to the challenges and opportunities of frontier life, while providing him with his first taste of the military responsibilities that would define much of his later career. The expedition took him deep into the Virginia backcountry, where he encountered Native American tribes, observed the complex relationships between different cultural groups, and began to understand the strategic importance of the Western territories to Virginia's future development. Picture Washington as a 16-year-old member of the Fairfax surveying party, traveling on horseback through the dense forests and rolling hills of the Shenandoah Valley, learning to navigate by compass and stars while gaining first-hand experience of the challenges faced by settlers on the colonial frontier. The expedition was both a business venture and an adventure, as Lord Fairfax sought to map and develop his vast land holdings, while the young participants gained valuable experience in wilderness survival and frontier diplomacy. The death of Lawrence Washington in 1752 marked another turning point in George's life, as he inherited Mount Vernon and began to establish himself as a planter, while also seeking opportunities for military service that would enhance his social standing and provide him with the experience necessary for leadership in colonial society. Lawrence's death also created a vacancy in the Virginia militia that George was eager to fill, seeing military service as both a duty and an opportunity for advancement. Washington's appointment as adjutant of the Virginia militia in 1752, at the age of 20, reflected both his family connections and his demonstrated competence as a leader, but it also placed him in a position of significant responsibility at a time when tensions between Britain and France were escalating in the Ohio Valley. His military commission gave him the rank of major and made him responsible for training and organizing militia units in his district, duties that required him to master the complexities of military administration and logistics. Picture Washington in his new role as a militia officer, studying military manuals and drilling with his men, while learning the fundamentals of tactics, strategy, and military law that would serve him throughout his career. His approach to military service was characteristically thorough, as he sought to understand not only the practical aspects of soldiering, but also the theoretical principles that governed successful military operations. The mission that would launch Washington's military career came in 1753, when Governor Robert Dinwiddie selected him to carry a message to the French commanders in the Ohio Valley, demanding that they withdraw from territory claimed by Virginia. This diplomatic mission was both dangerous and politically sensitive, as it required Washington to travel hundreds of miles through hostile territory while representing British interests in a region where French and Native American alliances posed significant threats to colonial expansion. Washington's journey to Fort Le Boeuf in the winter of 1753 to 1754 demonstrated his physical courage and diplomatic skills, while providing him with valuable intelligence about French military preparations and Native American attitudes toward the competing European powers. His detailed journal of the expedition, which was published upon his return, established his reputation as a reliable observer and competent leader, while also revealing his ability to communicate effectively with both European and Native American leaders. Picture Washington and his small party making their way through the snow-covered forests of western Pennsylvania, navigating by compass and following Indian trails while carrying messages that could determine the future of the Ohio Valley. The journey was fraught with danger, as they faced not only the natural hazards of winter travel, but also the possibility of attack by hostile Native American warriors or French soldiers. The French refusal to withdraw from the Ohio Valley led to Washington's appointment as lieutenant colonel in a Virginia regiment, tasked with establishing a British presence in the disputed territory, a mission that would result in his first military command and his introduction to the realities of frontier warfare. His orders were to complete the construction of a fort at the forks of the Ohio River and to resist any French attempts to interfere with British activities in the region. Washington's encounter with a French scouting party near Great Meadows in May 1754 resulted in a brief but significant skirmish that marked the beginning of what would become the French and Indian War, a global conflict that would reshape the balance of power in North America and provide Washington with the military experience that would prove crucial to his later success as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. The construction of Fort Necessity and the subsequent siege by French and Native American forces in July 1754 provided Washington with his first experience of military defeat and taught him valuable lessons about the importance of proper fortification, adequate supplies, and reliable intelligence. His surrender of the fort after a day-long battle was a humiliating experience, but it also demonstrated his ability to learn from mistakes and to adapt his tactics to changing circumstances. Picture Washington during the siege of Fort Necessity, directing the defense of his makeshift fortification while French bullets and Native American arrows filled the air around him, learning firsthand the brutal realities of frontier warfare and the challenges of commanding men under extreme stress. The experience was both traumatic and educational, as it forced him to confront his own limitations, while also revealing his capacity for leadership under fire. Washington's participation in General Edward Braddock's expedition against Fort Duquesne in 1755 provided him with exposure to European military methods, while also demonstrating the limitations of conventional tactics in the American wilderness. His service as a volunteer aide-de-camp to Braddock gave him access to high-level military planning, while also allowing him to observe the challenges of coordinating large-scale military operations in difficult terrain. The disaster that befell Braddock's army near the Monongahela River in July 1755 was a formative experience for Washington, as he witnessed the destruction of a well-equipped professional army by a smaller force of French soldiers and Native American warriors who used unconventional tactics adapted to forest warfare. Washington's heroic conduct during the retreat, when he helped organize the survivors and ensure the safety of the wounded, enhanced his reputation for courage and competence under fire. Picture Washington during the Battle of the Monongahela, riding back and forth along the line of retreating British soldiers while bullets tore through his coat and killed horses beneath him, demonstrating the physical courage and cool judgment that would characterize his leadership throughout his military career. His survival of the battle, despite being in the thick of the fighting, seemed almost miraculous to his contemporaries and contributed to his growing reputation as a man marked by destiny. Washington's appointment as Colonel and Commander-in-Chief of the Virginia Regiment in 1755 gave him responsibility for defending the colony's frontier against French and Native American raids. A challenging assignment that required him to coordinate the activities of scattered militia units, while also managing the complex logistics of frontier warfare. His success in this role demonstrated his ability to adapt European military principles to American conditions, while also developing the leadership skills that would serve him throughout his career. The years of frontier warfare from 1755 to 1758 provided Washington with invaluable experience in military administration, logistics, and the challenges of maintaining discipline and morale among troops operating under difficult conditions. His correspondence from this period reveals a young officer learning to balance the competing demands of military necessity, political pressure, and limited resources, while also developing his own philosophy of leadership and command. Picture Washington at his headquarters in Winchester, Virginia, poring over maps and reports while planning the defense of hundreds of miles of frontier against an elusive enemy that could strike anywhere and disappear into the forest before reinforcements could arrive. His responsibilities required him to master not only military tactics, but also the complexities of supply, recruitment, and coordination with civilian authorities. Washington's participation in General John Forbes's successful expedition against Fort Duquesne in 1758 marked the culmination of his frontier military service and provided him with the satisfaction of finally achieving the objective that had eluded British forces for years. The capture of the fort, which the French abandoned and destroyed before the British arrival, demonstrated the effectiveness of Forbes's methodical approach and validated Washington's growing understanding of the importance of careful planning and preparation in military operations. The end of active hostilities in the Ohio Valley in 1758 marked the conclusion of Washington's first military career and his transition back to civilian life as a planter and member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. His experiences during the French and Indian War had transformed him from an ambitious young surveyor into a seasoned military commander with a deep understanding of American conditions and a growing reputation for competence and integrity. Picture Washington returning to Mount Vernon after years of frontier service, his uniform exchanged for the clothes of a Virginia planter, his mind turning from military strategy to agricultural improvement and political participation. He was 26 years old, a veteran of frontier warfare, with a reputation for courage and competence, ready to take his place among Virginia's leading citizens, while carrying with him the military knowledge and leadership experience that would prove crucial to his country's future. As you continue your peaceful journey towards sleep, Imagine Washington on a quiet evening at Mount Vernon, standing on his piazza as he looked out over the Potomac River, his thoughts turning from the battles and campaigns of his youth to the challenges and opportunities of building a life as a Virginia gentleman. The young soldier who had learned the arts of war on the frontier was about to become a planter, politician, and family man, but the lessons he had learned about leadership, perseverance, and the importance of serving something greater than oneself would remain with him throughout his life. Chapter 3: Planter and Patriot, 1759 to 1775. Washington's marriage to Martha Dandridge Custis in January 1759 marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, as he transformed himself from a frontier soldier into one of Virginia's most prominent planters, while also beginning his political career as a member of the House of Burgesses. Martha was a wealthy widow with 2 young children and extensive land holdings, and her marriage to Washington significantly enhanced his social position and financial resources, while providing him with the stable family life that would anchor his later achievements. Picture the wedding ceremony at Martha's plantation, White House, on the Pamunkey River, where Virginia's colonial elite gathered to celebrate the union of 2 of the colony's most prominent families. Washington, resplendent in his blue and silver military uniform, represented the rising generation of Virginia leaders, while Martha, elegant in her yellow brocaded silk gown, brought to the marriage not only wealth and social connections, but also the practical experience of managing a large plantation and the wisdom that came from her previous marriage and motherhood. The early years of Washington's marriage were devoted to establishing himself at Mount Vernon and learning the complexities of large-scale plantation management, as he sought to transform his inherited property into one of Virginia's most productive and profitable agricultural enterprises. His approach to farming was characteristically systematic and innovative, as he experimented with new crops, improved agricultural techniques, and diversified his economic activities to reduce his dependence on tobacco cultivation. Washington's expansion of Mount Vernon from a modest farmhouse into an elegant mansion reflected both his growing wealth and his understanding of the importance of architectural grandeur in establishing social position in colonial Virginia. His careful attention to the design and decoration of his home demonstrated his appreciation for beauty and refinement, while also serving practical purposes in entertaining guests and conducting the business that was essential to his success as a planter and political leader. Picture Washington supervising the construction and renovation of Mount Vernon, working with skilled craftsmen to create a home that would reflect his status as a Virginia gentleman, while also serving as a center of hospitality and political discussion. The mansion's elegant proportions, fine furnishings, and beautiful gardens created an atmosphere of refined civilization that impressed visitors from throughout America and Europe, while providing Washington with a setting appropriate to his growing prominence in colonial society. Washington's management of his plantation workforce, which included both enslaved African Americans and white indentured servants, reflected the contradictions and complexities of Virginia society, while also revealing his practical approach to the economic and social challenges of plantation life. His treatment of his slaves was considered humane by the standards of his time, but it also demonstrated his acceptance of the institution of slavery as a fundamental part of Virginia's economic and social system. The development of Washington's political philosophy during his years as a planter was influenced by his reading of Enlightenment authors, his correspondence with other colonial leaders, and his growing awareness of the tensions between American interests and British imperial policy. His library at Mount Vernon contained works by political theorists like John Locke and Montesquieu, whose ideas about natural rights and the separation of powers would later influence his approach to constitutional government. Picture Washington in his study at Mount Vernon, reading by candlelight as he absorbed the latest political and philosophical works from Europe, while also corresponding with fellow planters and politicians about the issues facing colonial Virginia. His intellectual development during this period was largely self-directed, as he sought to understand the principles of government and economics that would guide his later political career. Washington's service in the Virginia House of Burgesses from 1758 to 1775 provided him with valuable experience in legislative politics, while also exposing him to the growing tensions between the American colonies and the British government. His approach to politics was pragmatic and moderate, as he sought to balance his loyalty to the British Crown with his commitment to protecting Virginia's interests and the rights of colonial Americans. The Stamp Act crisis of 1765 marked Washington's first significant involvement in the resistance to British imperial policy, as he joined other Virginia leaders in opposing what they saw as unconstitutional taxation without representation in Parliament. His participation in the non-importation agreements that were designed to pressure British merchants demonstrated his willingness to sacrifice personal economic interests for the sake of political principles. Picture Washington at a meeting of Virginia planters, discussing the implications of British tax policy while weighing the costs and benefits of resistance to imperial authority. His approach to these discussions was characteristically thoughtful and measured, as he sought to understand the long-term consequences of different courses of action, while also considering the immediate practical challenges facing colonial society. Washington's growing involvement in the resistance movement was motivated not by radical ideology, but by his practical understanding of the threats that British policy posed to colonial prosperity and self-government. His correspondence from this period reveals a man who was reluctant to break with established authority, but who was increasingly convinced that British actions were undermining the constitutional rights and economic interests of colonial Americans. The Boston Tea Party and the subsequent passage of the Coercive Acts in 1774 marked a turning point in Washington's political evolution, as he came to believe that peaceful resistance to British policy was no longer sufficient to protect American rights and interests. His selection as a delegate to the First Continental Congress reflected both his growing prominence in Virginia politics and his reputation as a moderate leader who could be trusted to represent colonial interests while avoiding unnecessary provocations. Picture Washington preparing for his journey to Philadelphia in 1774, packing his bags while contemplating the momentous decisions that lay ahead for the American colonies. His selection as a delegate was both an honor and a burden, as it placed him at the center of the most important political discussions in American history, while also requiring him to balance his loyalty to Virginia with his growing sense of American identity. Washington's participation in the Continental Congress revealed his talents as a political leader, while also demonstrating his understanding of the military challenges that would face the colonies if peaceful resistance failed to achieve their objectives. His military experience during the French and Indian War made him one of the few delegates with practical knowledge of warfare, and his presence in uniform at congressional sessions sent a clear message about his willingness to support armed resistance if necessary. The outbreak of fighting at Lexington and Concord in April 1775 transformed the political crisis into a military conflict and created the need for experienced military leadership that would guide the colonial resistance movement. Washington's appointment as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army was both a recognition of his military experience and a political decision designed to ensure Virginia's commitment to the common cause, while also providing the army with a leader whose character and reputation could unite the diverse colonial forces. Picture Washington receiving news of his appointment as Commander-in-Chief, understanding immediately the enormous responsibilities that had been placed upon his shoulders and the challenges that lay ahead in transforming a collection of colonial militias into an effective fighting force, capable of defeating the world's most powerful military. His acceptance of the position was both an act of patriotism and a personal sacrifice, as it required him to leave behind the comfortable life he had built at Mount Vernon for the uncertainties and dangers of military command. Washington's farewell to Martha and Mount Vernon in June 1775 marked the end of his life as a Virginia planter and the beginning of his transformation into a national leader whose decisions would determine the fate of American independence. His departure from his beloved home was both a personal loss and a symbolic moment, as he left behind the world of colonial Virginia to help create a new nation based on principles of liberty and self-government. Picture Washington on his final morning at Mount Vernon before departing for Cambridge, standing on his piazza as he looked out over the Potomac River and the plantation that had been the center of his world for 16 years. He was 43 years old, a successful planter and respected political leader who was about to embark on the greatest challenge of his life, carrying with him the hopes and expectations of a people who were willing to risk everything for the cause of freedom. As you drift deeper into peaceful slumber, imagine Washington riding north from Mount Vernon toward his destiny as the leader of the American Revolution, his mind already turning toward the military and political challenges that awaited him, while his heart remained connected to the Virginia home and family that would sustain him through the trials ahead. The planter, who had learned the arts of leadership in the Virginia House of Burgesses, was about to become the general who would lead America to independence and the president who would establish the foundations of democratic government. Chapter 4, Commander-in-Chief, 1775 to 1783. Washington's arrival at Cambridge, Massachusetts, in July 1775 marked the beginning of his transformation from a Virginia planter into the commander-in-chief of a continental army, a role that would test every aspect of his character and leadership abilities, while requiring him to master challenges that no American had ever faced before. The army he inherited was a collection of colonial militias with little training, inadequate supplies, and no unified command structure. Yet from this unpromising material he would forge the instrument of American independence. Picture Washington's first view of the Continental Army encamped around Boston, a motley collection of farmers, artisans, and laborers from across New England who had responded to the call for resistance against British tyranny, but who lacked the discipline, equipment, and experience necessary for sustained military operations. The sight must have been both inspiring and daunting, as Washington recognized both the patriotic spirit of these citizen soldiers and the enormous work that would be required to transform them into an effective fighting force. The siege of Boston provided Washington with his first opportunity to demonstrate his leadership abilities, while also revealing the challenges that would characterize his entire military career. Inadequate supplies, unreliable funding, short-term enlistments, and the constant need to balance military necessity with political considerations. His success in maintaining the siege while building an army demonstrated his understanding that the revolution would be won, not through brilliant tactical victories, but through persistence, endurance, and the ability to keep an army in the field despite overwhelming obstacles. Washington's decision to fortify Dorchester Heights in March 1776, using cannons captured at Fort Ticonderoga and transported across hundreds of miles of winter wilderness, demonstrated both his strategic insight and his willingness to take calculated risks to achieve decisive results. The successful occupation of the Heights forced the British to evacuate Boston and provided the Continental Army with its first major victory, establishing Washington's reputation as a commander capable of achieving significant results through careful planning and bold execution. Picture Washington on the night of March 4th, 1776, personally supervising the construction of fortifications on Dorchester Heights, while his men worked in silence to avoid detection by British sentries, knowing that the success or failure of the operation could determine the fate of the siege and perhaps the entire revolution. His presence among the working parties demonstrated the hands-on leadership style that would characterize his command throughout the war. The British evacuation of Boston in March 1776 was followed by Washington's movement of the Continental Army to New York, where he correctly anticipated that the British would attempt to establish a base for operations designed to divide the colonies and crush the rebellion. His preparations for the defense of New York revealed both his strategic understanding and his recognition that the Continental Army would need to adapt its tactics to American conditions, rather than attempting to fight European-style battles against a superior enemy. The Declaration of Independence in July 1776 transformed the nature of the conflict from a rebellion against specific British policies into a war for complete independence. A change that increased both the stakes of the struggle and the challenges facing Washington as Commander-in-Chief. His reading of the Declaration to his troops demonstrated his understanding of the importance of maintaining morale and commitment among soldiers who were being asked to risk their lives for abstract principles of liberty and self-government. Picture Washington addressing his assembled troops as the Declaration of Independence was read aloud, watching their faces as they absorbed the momentous words that transformed them from rebels into the army of a new nation. The ceremony was both a celebration and a solemn moment of commitment, as officers and soldiers alike understood that they were now fighting not merely for redress of grievances, but for the creation of an independent American republic. The disasters that befell the Continental Army during the New York Campaign of 1776, including defeats at Long Island, Kip's Bay, and White Plains, tested Washington's leadership abilities while also teaching him valuable lessons about the limitations of his army and the need to adapt his strategy to American conditions. His successful retreat from Long Island and his subsequent withdrawal across New Jersey demonstrated his ability to preserve his army even in the face of overwhelming enemy superiority. Washington's crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas night 1776 and his subsequent victories at Trenton and Princeton marked the turning point of the early war and demonstrated his understanding that bold action was sometimes necessary to restore morale and maintain the revolution's momentum. The success of these operations, achieved against overwhelming odds and in the depths of winter, established Washington's reputation as a commander capable of achieving the impossible through careful planning and inspired leadership. Picture Washington standing in the bow of the boat as his army crossed the ice-choked Delaware River, his face set with determination as he contemplated the desperate gamble that could either revive the revolution or destroy what remained of the Continental Army. The crossing was both a military operation and an act of faith, as Washington bet everything on his ability to achieve surprise and his soldiers' willingness to follow him into battle despite their recent defeats and hardships. The winter at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778 represented the nadir of the Continental Army's fortunes, but also demonstrated Washington's greatest qualities as a leader, as he held his army together through months of starvation, disease, and despair, while also working to rebuild it into a more effective fighting force. His presence among his suffering soldiers, sharing their hardships while maintaining his own composure and determination, provided the moral leadership that kept the revolution alive during its darkest hour. The transformation of the Continental Army during the Valley Forge winter, aided by the training provided by Baron von Steuben and other European volunteers, demonstrated Washington's ability to learn from experience and to adapt his methods to changing circumstances. His willingness to embrace new ideas and techniques while maintaining his focus on the ultimate objective of independence showed the intellectual flexibility that was essential to his success as a military leader. Picture Washington walking through the snow-covered huts at Valley Forge, visiting his sick and hungry soldiers, while maintaining the calm demeanor and confident bearing that assured them of his commitment to their welfare and to the cause for which they were suffering. His ability to project strength and determination even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles was perhaps his greatest contribution to the survival of the revolution. The entry of France into the war in 1778 transformed the strategic situation and provided Washington with the opportunity to coordinate Continental Army operations with French naval and military forces, a challenge that required him to master the complexities of coalition warfare while maintaining American independence and dignity. His successful collaboration with French commanders like Rochambeau